What actually is a hedge knight? Sir Duncan the Tall is a hedge knight, but what does that mean? Let's take a look. Hi everyone, this is Robert. Welcome to In Deep Geek. If you like theories, background, history and lore about A Song of Ice and Fire, The Lord of the Rings and The Witcher, this is the place for you. Welcome. We know that Sir Duncan the Tall is a hedge knight. That's the title of the first of the Dunk and Egg novellas. But what does that mean? Is he a lesser kind of knight, or is there something else going on? Well, first of all, if you are a knight, then you are a knight. There are no official different classes of knights. Every knight is made a knight in the same way, by being made a knight by another knight, or the king. They kneel and swear to uphold the knightly virtues. When they rise, they are a knight of the Seven Kingdoms, like all the other knights. There are many more extra hoops to go through if you want to be very extra. A night spent in vigil, praying to the Seven, and to the warrior in particular, anointing with 7 oils, walking barefoot to the ceremony and so on, but everyone accepts that even an unwitnessed dubbing by another knight is legitimate. And being a knight brings with it certain benefits. You can put the Sir before your name, which is impressive in and of itself. You can mix with a different class of people and so on. But also, obviously, it brings with it several responsibilities too, like upholding those knightly vows to defend and protect the weak and innocent, fight bravely and obey the king and your lord, and so on. But despite all that, being a knight is good in that feudalistic world. You are now in the 1%. A bit below the lords, but clearly above the great unwashed masses. You are a knight, after all. But Westeros is a very stratified culture, and the rank of knight is as stratified as any other. Not all lords are the same, and not all knights are the same. And first of all, let's address the elephant in the room. Any knight can make another knight, which means that there is no clear paper trail as to exactly who is a knight. If any knight can make another knight, theoretically one unscrupulous knight could make 1,000 other knights. So can anyone just claim to be a knight without proof? Well, as we will get onto, there are a lot of barriers to that. To be honest, this whole issue becomes even more murky when you get out of Westeros. Sir Barristan, Tyrion and Ser Jorah all encounter knights they aren't 100% sure are really knights in the truest sense, but they can't prove it one way or another. There is no certification involved in being a knight. Sir Duncan the Tall definitely had that issue. He claimed that he had been knighted by Sir Arlen on his deathbed, which I doubt, but I did a whole other video on that. But how could he prove it? The issue here is that being a knight obviously adds a degree of prestige to your name and status, but being a knight doesn't automatically make you rich. On the contrary, it actually adds a whole series of obligations and costs. If you wish to appear knightly, you need armour and weapons. Horses, probably plural, one for jousting or warfare, one for riding between places, and probably one for your squire, because, yes, you probably also need a squire to tend to your horses, keep your armour in pristine condition, and so on. And a squire would need feeding and housing and training, and obviously you would also need feeding and housing, and maybe a little extra to enjoy life with. None of this comes cheap. We have a lot of examples of people buying and selling armour and horses in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, and although prices vary depending on war and economic conditions, the headline is that a full set of new armour or a top-quality horse would cost almost the same as a random commoner would earn in a year. And those are just the start-up costs. Buying tournament lances, replacing old armour or horses, getting your sigil emblazoned on things, board for yourself and your retinue. It all adds up. Which I suppose makes the cost the real barrier to people claiming to be knights. So how do knights afford it? Well, some knights come from wealth. Sir Jaime Lannister never needed to worry about where his next horse or set of armour came from. And some knights were what was known as landed knights. They were given a keep and some lands when they were knighted, providing a small income. It placed them a little below the lords, as they didn't have the right to dispense justice in their own lands, but well above the normal folk. The lands were inheritable, but not the title Sir. That had to be bestowed personally, although, as any knight can make another knight, it was clearly open to abuse. Sir Gregor Clegane is probably the best example in the main story of a landed knight, or Sir Davos before he was ennobled. There are actually quite a lot of landed knights in the Seven Kingdoms. House Manderley claims 100 of them, for example. And closely associated to that, there were the trusted servants of noble houses who were then made knights. Think Sir Roderick Cassel. The Cassels were loyal and competent members of the Stark entourage, so had a place in their household. It actually didn't matter much if they were knighted or not. Geoffrey Cassel rose to be captain of the Stark household guard without becoming a knight, and if he'd had any children, they would presumably also be a member of the Stark inner circle, irrespective of their knightly status. The other knights, however, without their own income or a friendly lord, had to find a way to pay the bills. One way was to take up short-term service with a noble house and become what were known as household knights. A good example of this is Sir Bennis of the Brown Shield, who took up service with Sir Eustace Osgrey at Standfast in the Swan Sword, the Dunk and Egg story. In return for food and lodging, care for his horse and the use of the castle forge and so on, he vowed to obey and uphold the honour of his new master, Eustace Osgrey. Dunk clearly took the same vow later on. Most of the time, these arrangements were short-term, to cover particular local issues or threats, and they can probably be equated to taking up service with the king for massive campaigns, such as against the Ninepenny Kings or Vulture Lords. The king or lord concerned needed some short-term help and was willing to pay for it. But when that wasn't an option, one way to pay the bills could be to be very good at tourneys. There is definitely money to be made in tourneys. In the Mystery Knight and the Hedge Knight, it's clear that the loser loses their armour, and then has the option to ransom it back. Given what we know about the cost of armour being nearly the entire income for a commoner for a year, that's a big upside to winning even a couple of jousts, and a big downside to losing. Sir Uthor Underleaf, the snail, was one such knight who made a living from tourneys. He also bribed tournament officials to give him favourable draws and bet on himself against weaker opponents and never let his own reputation get too big. It was a living, after all. But if you don't have even that on a regular basis, then you are a hedge knight. Perhaps you try your hand in a tourney every now and then. Perhaps you take service for a random lord for a while. Perhaps you are hired for some other purpose every now and then. Maybe sometimes you have a lot of money. Maybe sometimes you don't. But you don't have a permanent home or income. If you are low on your luck, you may even have to sleep in a hedge. Hence, a hedge knight. This is an inherent contradiction. A knight is viewed as something better and other. Just read Sansa's thoughts about knights before she reached King's Landing. But some knights are left scratching and scraping their way to a living, and some of those are good knights, perhaps even true knights. But many are not. Many just take whatever money or lodging that they can get with the power of their title and move on to somewhere else. So a hedge knight is a knight, and no one can ever take that title from him, but one without an independent source of income, so is forced to roam the Seven Kingdoms in search of money to meet the high costs of being a knight. Maybe they get lucky and find a household to take them in, or maybe they are good enough at jousting to earn a living that way, but mostly they just roam the lands seeking employment, or tourneys. They aren't the bottom of the Seven Kingdoms' economic structure, so it's hard to feel too sorry for them, but they are the bottom of the lordly structure. They could turn up at a random feast and wouldn't be turned away, but would be below the salt, and compared to most, they have an exorbitantly high basic cost of living. Most importantly, being a hedge knight does not imply any moral judgment, at least for us readers. Sir Duncan the Tall was definitely a true knight, despite also being a hedge knight for several years of his long career. Some hedge knights are paragons of knighthood, some are the diametric opposite. And perhaps that tells us a lot about George R. R. Martin's world. What the world may value is not necessarily what we may value. A hedge knight is the lowest of the knights, but sometimes can be the best of them. If you'd like to see more A Song of Ice and Fire videos, please click on the link on the left of your screen. Or if you'd like to support this channel, thank you. There's a link to my Patreon page on the right of your screen. That's all for this time. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.